Good morning.
Good morning.
Let's do that. Okay, let's do this over. Good morning. Thank you. Well, my name is Suzanne Broadbent. I'm the resident has-been. And I'm here to welcome you. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. My very brief physical description is I am a 72-year-old white woman whose hair today is brown with gold highlights. I'm 5'4" tall, and I won't tell you my weight because it would be a lie anyway. So, welcome to First Unitarian Church, where our mission is to explore the eternal, nurture community, and pursue the common good. We welcome you in your brokenness and in your wholeness, no matter who you have been, who you are, or who you are becoming. We greet you today with love. I'd like to extend a special welcome to everyone who is watching us on YouTube this morning. During the prelude, please introduce yourself in the comments and let us know where you are joining us from. If you're in Oklahoma City, what neighborhood are you in? And if you're elsewhere, what city are you in? And now, the prelude prepares us for worship. We light this chalice. Oops.
Wiggle everybody's back.
We light this chalice in Midtown, Oklahoma City, on land that was home to first Americans, including the Apache, Caddo, and Wichita, on land that was taken from the Muskogee and Seminole and other removed and relocated peoples. We light the chalice as a symbol of our sacred time together. The burning chalice represents the light of reason and science, the warmth of loving community, the cleansing heat of justice, and the flame of hope.
We begin our service today with these words from Unitarian Universalist Association President, Reverend Susan Frederick Gray, quote, "We are living in a time of tremendous opportunity and needed change, and the health and strength of our communities and our commitment to this theology of love and justice and interdependence is crucial. And I know that we can hold one another in this work. We have been readying for it, my friends. We have been reading and readying for years to grow our muscles for resistance and for courage and for solidarity. This work, this moment that we are in, it is going to change us. The work ahead, it is going to change us deeply. That's why we are a living tradition," unquote. Today, we celebrate the ways our past has helped to ready us for this moment and for this work of resistance and courage and solidarity. Today, we'll hear voices from the past, knowing that we are not held by the past. We look back, even as we look for the new revelation to guide our hearts and our spirits as we move forward into something new. Our opening hymn is Communion. You find it pasted in the back of many of our gray hymnals. The words were written by a long-term member, Carol Koss, who often still joins us from California. The piece was commissioned for our congregation's centennial celebration in 1993. I'd like to invite Suzanne Broadbent up to the lectern for a special presentation.
Well, the National Register of Historic Places designation is an honor bestowed by the Secretary of the Interior of the United States. Where you're sitting this morning is now a National Registered designated area. We're on the National Register of Historic Places. Now, it takes a lot of work to accomplish this achievement. The Secretary of the Interior, you will notice, we finally have a woman, Native American, as Secretary of the Interior. She does not sit at her desk and go, wow, I think First Unitarian Church should be on this register. We have to take it to her. And we did that earlier this year. Some of you worked with Matt Pierce, a PhD historian, who came over here, researched all of our documents, climbed into the steeple, and did all the heavy lifting to fill out the application. Now, this kind of work is not free, and it is not easy. And it came to us through our friend, Marva Ellard. She was working on getting the National Trust the historic designation for Villa Teresa, working with Catherine Montgomery, whom we all loved and is now of blessed memory. And Catherine and Marva decided they would like to add us. The board approved that, and they began to work on it. And Marva continued to pay Catherine to do that. And Marva is here with us this morning. So we are honored also to have Linda Ozan, the State Director of the State Historic Preservation Office. Linda, if you would join us. And Marshall Woodward, the president-elect of our congregation, is going to accept the certificate that Linda will present. This is probably Marcia's first official duty as president-elect. Yes, Marshall is out of town today. Well, that gets you the idea here, and all I have to say is after 129 years, we upstart Unitarians in the Bible Belt are still here.
Would you say with me the mission of this congregation as printed on the cover of your order of service? To explore the eternal, nurture community, and pursue the common good. So let's look at each one of these and consider their deeper meaning, starting with explore the eternal. For Unitarian Universalists, this does not translate as studying what is transcendent and separate from the mortal, studying an omnipotent and unknowable God. That's because for Unitarian Universalists, we find the eternal within the mortal, within finite, fallible human life. And because life itself is constantly evolving, not in some straight arrow toward perfection, but in many creative twists and turns and options, the way that we go about exploring the eternal must also change. Here's a voice from our past to give you a sense of how our religious exploration has changed over time.
A letter from Mrs. J. Dwyer, the Religious Education Director, from February 1959 regarding the first Unitarian Church School. It's over 60 years ago. Dear parents and other members of the parish, many of you are not familiar with the textbooks being taught in this semester of our church school. We hope you will find of interest a more detailed description. 3 and 4-year-old classes will continue their delightful here and now experiences with Martin and Judy. These stories, not religious in themselves, furnish the material from which religious attitudes develop. In kindergarten, we use Always Growing by Dr. Elizabeth Manuel. The author's primary purpose is to awaken an awareness of, an appreciation for, and the wonder of life and growth. She helps the child to realize that he is always growing, not just physically, but in knowledge and understanding and responsibility to others. In first grade, we're using Animal Babies by Alice Day Pratt. The child's natural love of animals, plus these well-told stories, help him aware of the kinship of all living things, that we all have varying skills and accomplishments. Second grade, we use From Long Ago and Many Lands by Sophia Leon Foz. There are 7 stories from the Bible, a number of Buddhist writings, and from other sources. This book stresses the human universals that bind together the family of man. In third grade, we use When Jesus Was a Boy and When Jesus Grew Up by Elizabeth Reed. In fourth grade, we use Beginnings of Earth and Sky by Sophia Foz. 20 racial or religious groups make a contribution to this text. Included are a present-day scientist speculation on how the universe began, which I bet was interesting to see now, the speculation from 1960, and a modern person's thoughts about death. In fifth grade, it's The Church Across the Street by Reginald Manuel and Sophia Foz. And it's a description of our neighboring denominations. The authority of each denomination was asked to check this book for accuracy. Appropriate film strips, visits to various churches, interesting craft work, and a resourceful teacher promote a friendly understanding of our neighboring churches. In sixth grade, it's the Old Testament stories, where we believe that our children should be biblically literate, and our Judeo-Christian heritage is an important one to hand on to them. Seventh grade, Jesus the Carpenter's Son by Sophia Foz. Jesus is pictured as a figure of courage and conviction who had choices to make in a time of political and religious conflict. Biblical sources are given, and young readers are invited to check them for accuracy and interpretation. In 8th grade, they used the book Men of Prophetic Fire by Roland Wolf. In 9th grade, they focused on the New Testament. The structure of the Bible is studied. It is presented as myth, history, and poetry. We want boys and girls to know this saga of men striving for a better way of life. So, that was the curriculum from 60 years ago, and there are some similarities and there are some differences, right? They talked a lot about the Bible back then. We don't talk about the Bible as much in our RE programs. The Bible is just one of the many sources we include with our weekly stories in our classes. Sophia Leon Foz, who you heard mentioned, is like one of the most famous Unitarian religious educators ever. And her curriculum was known for experiential learning. And it's something that we still hold to today in our religious exploration programs. We don't just sit in the classroom and learn Bible verses. We engage with the stories and engage with the moral lessons of the day in an experiential way. And that's what really those old Martin and Judy books were known for the most. And also today, in our RE programs, we place a high emphasis on relationships, because what and how we learn is impacted by where and with whom we're learning. And I think the religious educators of 60 years ago would feel right at home with our current curriculum. Thank you. I'd now like to invite Maureen Harvey up for our call to offering.
Every Sunday, we take an offering. Since 2002, all the cash and designated checks from that offering have gone directly to external nonprofit organizations doing good work, our Change for Change partners. For the month of September, our Change for Change partner is the Roe Fund. This fund helps low and no-income Oklahomans obtain reproductive services, including abortion, referrals, and information. Grants are paid directly to abortion providers. For those of you who are in the sanctuary with us today, in just a moment we'll be passing the offering plate. If you're not able to make a gift today, we invite you to write a note of encouragement to our Change for Change partner organization, and we'll share those messages with them as well. And if you're watching us online, please make your gift by sending a check to First Unitarian. Just write Change for Change on the memo line, or make an online payment through our website, 1UC.org.
And now, would you please join us?
least two ways in which a congregation can pursue the common good: through charity and through justice. And those two aren't the same thing. Through charity, we help those who have been hurt by a system of injustice. But through justice work, we fight to change the system itself. Since practically its beginnings, this congregation has done some of both. But the fire in our blood, if you will, is social justice. And we haven't always agreed on what exactly this term means. Back in the late 1920s, when ground was broken for the building in which you sit today, there was turmoil in the congregation. The minister at the time, Reverend Homer Sheffert, scandalized folks in Oklahoma City when he officiated one of the first humanist weddings in the United States, and when he chose Mother's Day 1929 to preach from the pulpit in favor of birth control. There were some who believed that the church had become far left and that too much emphasis on social justice would alienate members, especially those who were best able to support the congregation financially. But the congregation weathered the disagreement and went on to make social justice a cornerstone of our mission. Today, in 2022, we hear echoes of the same issues that sparked action among the members of this congregation in the 1950s and 60s, namely racism and religious freedom, or the separation of church and state. In 1956, when 11-year-old Edmund Atkins was refused admission to Cassidy School because he was black, a teacher from that school resigned in protest. That man, Samuel Powers, was a member of this congregation, and the First Unitarian Board of Trustees and the larger congregation rallied around him in support. Around that same time, when the Oklahoma City Council of Churches pushed for public school students to be released from their classes in order to attend religious training, members of First Unitarian were at the front line arguing against religion on school time. The church's minister, Reverend Frank Holmes, was quoted in the Oklahoma City paper saying, quote, "There are bound to be children whose parents will not wish them to register for such classes and who will inevitably be subjected to an embarrassing special attention. Their parents will be forced to make a kind of religious decision which should not be required of them in an American public school," unquote. The Board of Education ended up turning down the proposal for release time for religious education. Sadly, Cassidy School would not be integrated until 1965, when Edmund's little brother Charles was enrolled in the 6th grade. That same year, some Unitarian Universalists had answered Reverend Dr. King's call to join him in Selma, Alabama, including Reverend James Reeb and Viola Liuzzo, who were both killed for their support of racial equity and justice. Back here in Oklahoma City, members of this congregation marched in protest organized by Clara Luper against racist brutality, and they helped to raise funds in support of injured civil rights activists. But the work to become anti-racist was only just beginning, and it continues today. In 1968, First Unitarian's new minister, Reverend Bruce Clary, attended the Unitarian Universalist Association's General Assembly in Cleveland, just weeks after the assassination of Martin Luther King. At that assembly, the delegates voted to fund the Black Affairs Council at $1 million. The problem was that they didn't actually have the money. Efforts to rescind the allocation were seen as a betrayal that led some people, including many people of color, to leave our faith altogether. By the beginning of the 1970s, Unitarian Universalism was split by polarization and a lack of trust, and this congregation was not immune. So here is another voice from our past, Reverend Bruce Clary, speaking about his experience at that fateful General Assembly and about the need for justice and reconciliation.
Good morning. My name is Courtney Custer. My pronoun is she. I am reading the words from Reverend Bruce Clary from a sermon preached on June 2nd, 1968. Quote, "Determining our priorities was the theme of this year's General Assembly, and let me tell you, the Assembly went about its business doing so. The delegates said that the Black Affairs Council was a priority, that the strengthening of our districts was a priority, and theological education and communications. And Dr. Sutherland said it, and remember it. Our highest priority is to move at once towards reconciliation with one another. You had better believe that, for feelings were hurt, tempers flared, people felt long-held and cherished principles were compromised or even betrayed. And why? After the week's experience, it had become very clear to me that when we gather as an assembly, we have a very difficult time determining our priorities. Historically, we've argued with each other over programs and services and procedures and resolutions. We've had a habit of being a little too impressed with the swing of the times. We, as all men do, tend to want to swing with them rather than transform them. So it is that we may now be in a period of pain, but also in a time of truth and renewal. My concern is for the people who went home angry last week. It is for the minister who appealed to his brethren to consider the rights of his son. My concern is for the Black man whose tears streamed down his face in joy. And it is for the delegate who felt he had lost something precious. My concern is for the universal church, which includes them all. So go now and move towards reconciliation with these men. Go now in faith and hope and love.
Our choir anthem, The Garden, is in some ways a microcosm of our music program at First Unitarian. It was written by beloved member Jim Gordon, set to music for guitar by choir director Lois Allen, and later arranged for choir by Beverly McClary. And of course, it is conducted today by our new choir director, 1UCOKC Ezekacha.
Just before dawn, this morning our garden on earth in darkness was made. Life blooms of all sizes, shapes and colors by an unseen gardener arrayed.
who hears us when we pray.
Gives me shivers. Right in the middle of our mission statement is nurture community. This refers to our role in the larger community, but more specifically, it relates to our own community, our congregation. It reminds us not to take this for granted. Like this dear old building, this historic sanctuary, our congregation needs to be maintained. It needs ongoing care and attention. And like our children, youth, and lifelong learners, our community needs to be nurtured. Throughout its history, this congregation has experienced crises, upheavals, and conflicts that sometimes left lasting trauma. The causes of some of that trauma are still fresh to many. Other crises and conflicts have been long forgotten, although the effects may still be felt. Most recently, we've made our way through a global pandemic, through more than 2 years of physical separation. And during that time, we learned to lead and participate in online services. We struggled to connect virtually. We disagreed about what was safe enough. And while we're back together again, we're together in a different way than before. Some of us are back in the building, in this beautiful sanctuary built nearly 100 years ago, recently added to the National Register of Historic Places. We are here in this place redolent with voices of the past. but not all of us. Some watch online. Some are right here in Oklahoma City, and some are far away, but still connected. Some of us remember the before times and yearn for old traditions. And some of us have only known this congregation post March 15th, 2020, and come without expectations of the way things used to be. There are days when it can feel like the impediments are just too great, and some of you, like me, sometimes might find yourself wondering, how is a progressive church to survive times like these? But here again, we can look back to our past to remind ourselves that crises have happened before, events more terrible than what we're experiencing today. And yet somehow, even through a time of despair, there was community, there was hope. The spring of 1995 was such a time.
Good morning, my name is Kathy Webster, and my pronouns are she, her. I'm reading an excerpt written by Fern Stanley, who was interim minister of this church, as she wrote in the Oklahoma City Unitarian, April 25th, 1995. Our church community is deeply wounded by the tragic events that occurred here. Wounded by all the death and destruction and suffering that has occurred and continues to occur, of course, but most of all by the fact that Susan Farrell did not survive and Mary Renty is still unaccounted for. In our gathering Thursday night, we heard of how the lives of these two women have touched so many in our congregation in so many ways. We heard anger and sorrow and despair. It was good to be together and to share our pain, for while such gatherings do not make the pain disappear, perhaps they do make it just a little easier to bear. The repercussions for all these events will linger for a very long time. We will, I know, continue to gather and to share and to help one another.
One year ago, we were in one of those especially frustrating points in the pandemic, when hopes for some kind of return to normalcy had been dashed by a new variant. And at that time, still on Zoom, I gave a sermon where I compared this congregation to a river that keeps on flowing, even though the water within it is constantly changing. Well, this year, as we were planning for our in-gathering service and our water ceremony, a member of the worship team, Liz Pillar-Little, shared how some researchers in STEM fields have been using not just a river, but a braided river as an analogy for a new kind of workforce development. These researchers contrast a pipeline model of career development in which an individual follows a fairly linear and predictable path through their education and career. They compare that to a braided river model, which captures opportunity, variability, and responsiveness, embraces diversity, and recognizes the many on-ramps, pathways, and pivots that real life induces. So today, in speaking about this congregation and what has held it together throughout the years, throughout the happy times, as well as the times of conflict and crisis, I want to compare us not to a river that flows in one direction between two banks, but to a braided river, which isn't a single body of water, but a system made up of multiple channels that interweave and interact, even when they are separated by small, sometimes temporary islands. The old way of thinking about church was like a meandering river. Streams or rivulets flow into a great river, which stays as an identifiable entity until it flows into a gulf or the sea. And in the same way, the thinking went, you have people going along their paths until they join a congregation, and then they pretty much stay in that congregation until they die or move away for good. In a regular or meandering river, all the streams lose their previous identities and become the river. And in a similar way, in an old model of church, I fear there was a tendency to expect that once someone joined a congregation, they would accommodate to that congregation's traditions and implicit culture. In other words, be like us or find another church. But at a time when the experts are declaring that mainstream religion is dying out in this country, that COVID was the nail in the coffin for congregational life, and that we can expect church to be a thing of the past in the very near future, I want to float a different idea. What if it's not that our river is drying up and disappearing, but that it's becoming a braided river? Some rivers are braided because they carry a large amount of sediment. The flow is fast and the terrain is steep. And this might well describe the time in which we're living. Life itself is heavy with stuff. We're all carrying more than it seems possible to bear at times, and life may feel like it's flowing and fast forward. Think of how things were the week of March 1st, 2020, and compare that to just 2 weeks later. Think of life on January 5th, 2021, and compare that to the evening of January 6th. And the road we travel, well, it is nothing if not steep. But what would a church that is more like a braided river than a meandering one look like? I invite you to imagine these things. Imagine a church in which some people leave for a time, maybe because their spiritual search draws them someplace else for a while, but then they come back. And when they return, they are met with pure joy. And my heart is full of joy today because I see some of those faces here today. Imagine a church in which children and youth, when they graduate from high school, don't just branch off and disappear into the unknown, but they stay connected, even as they follow their own path. Imagine a congregation in which some people regularly attend in person while other people attend mostly online. And yet all can say, that's my church. Imagine a church in which the new doesn't displace the old, but they are able to coexist and commingle, building over time a community that is vibrant and truly diverse. The thing about a braided river is that with all the sediment and speed and the shifting of channels, it changes its own landscape over time. Imagine then A church that isn't just responsive to the changing needs of its community, but that actively changes its community. But you might ask, with all those channels merging and diverging, what holds it all together? Well, in the case of a braided river, all the streams, though they may cover an entire valley floor, they are all being pulled in the same direction. And in the case of a church, there needs to be a shared vision, a shared sense of what it's all for. It's about more than a building, although that is important. It's about more than a single stream of tradition, a single way of doing things, a single way of remembering. It requires us to be able to hold and let go at the same time. It requires us to allow for many different spiritual and personal paths that may sometimes merge and sometimes run parallel, sometimes verge off in some unknown direction, only to come close once again, but that are all held within this one great plane of love, commitment, and nurturing. It requires a force as strong as gravity that is a vision of the beloved community, in which people of diverse racial, gender, economic, theological, educational backgrounds and identities, of diverse sexual orientations and physical, emotional, and cognitive abilities all live together in an interdependent web of love, care, and respect. What would a braided river church look like? Let's imagine that together. I invite you now to join me in a spirit of prayer or meditation. Spirit of life, source of love, that which holds us together and calls us toward beloved community on this bright and beautiful day. We hold in care those who are ill or coping with significant life challenges, such as divorce, or the loss of a job, or financial difficulties. We also hold in care those who are grieving the death of a loved one. And I invite you now to say aloud, to whisper, or to hold within your heart the names of these individuals. We hold in care those youth who grew up in our church but have left to attend college, take a job, or just pursue their own path. May they know that as physically distant as they may be, we are still connected. We hold in care those members of our community who have left for various reasons. May they know that this community is still here for them. We hold in care those who we don't yet know, those who are struggling in these difficult times, who may feel marginalized or alone, those who are searching for a spiritual home, for a place where they can seek their own spiritual truth within the embrace of loving community. May we be emboldened not only to welcome them with open arms, but to reach out to them. Today we hold in love and celebration our Jewish siblings who will mark the beginning of the days of awe, the high holy days, with the start of Rosh Hashanah this evening. We hold in love our pagan siblings who celebrate Mabon at this time of year. We hold in love and celebration all those who rejoice in the beginning of autumn, and those who find affirmation and opportunities for awareness, and special days recently celebrated, like Celebrate Bisexuality Day and the International Day of Sign Language. We hold and love all those who are celebrating weddings, trips, births, and other joyful occasions. May we mourn together. May we rejoice together. May we fight together. May we acknowledge and respect one another's own unique paths in life. May we always aspire to work to become the beloved community we envision. May it be so. Amen. I invite you to please rise in body or in spirit to sing the hymn that was the standard processional in this church for many years, and some will remember when it was sung here every Sunday. It's number 12 in the gray hymnal, O Life That Maketh All Things New.
We extinguish this flame, but not the light of love and community which burns on in our hearts.
I want to remind you all that immediately after our service, we have the Engagement Expo happening in Daniel Hall. If you have been with us for a long time and are looking for new ways to engage, or if you are just joining us, or if you're new in our community, we warmly welcome you to attend the expo and learn about all the wonderful ways that you can connect with this congregation. We'll conclude our service today with words from a beloved minister of this congregation, Reverend John Johnstone. We shall overcome when we can truly celebrate the diversity of contributions and talents offered by all people. We shall overcome hatred and prejudice and oppression. When we can truly extend our hands to one another in loving acceptance, we shall overcome the past that haunts us now. Living in peace and freedom, we shall overcome the wrongs that have happened and the debts left unpaid. Let us join together in that commitment to overcome. Let us say together, Amen. Amen. May it be so.